Well, as one of the last new shows that come out this fall, can this be another hit show for Netflix, and can it be the Downton Abbey replacement everyone has been asking for? Hey guys, remember the series premiere of the new Netflix show The Crown. This is Season 1, Episode 1, Walferton Splash, and I was definitely very interested in the show for a number of reasons. One, because the fact that it is about Queen Elizabeth, and I don't know a ton about that family, obviously because I am American and I haven't really done research on that kind of stuff. But I've always been very interested. I mean, think about the way that we run our political systems. Things are very different there in London. I was interested in seeing how the show was going to portray that. Also, the fact that it's a new Netflix show. Netflix has been knocking out of the park in terms of, new content and things like that. I really don't think the only show that really didn't really go well overall for them is like something like Marseille or something like that. Most of their shows have turned out really, really great, and this to me looked like it was going to be a really great show. And I'm happy to say that while I don't think this first episode is the best the show can give us, this definitely was a really great start. I really did love what this episode had to offer. It's not perfect, I definitely will say that, but overall, I really do like this show. I'm definitely going to continue watching, and let's just get right into it, because I definitely do want to talk about what happened in this first episode overall. So we start off in 1947, Buckingham Palace, and right off the bat, they did a really good job at getting us to introduce these characters, which I don't really want to say characters because they're real people, but I'm going to say characters in terms of the show because that's what they are. Even though it's a biopic, they're still characters, they still are the version of that person in this show. They are in fact characters, even though I don't really want to call them that. But basically we meet King George IV, and he is heavily coughing up blood, and he flushes it down the toilet. He's clearly trying to cover up how bad it is. You can tell that things are really bad, and he's not really... Oh, actually, King George the Sixth, sorry. But you can see how bad it really is, and I thought it was a really great way to start things off. We then meet Princess Elizabeth, who's watching a ceremony for Prince Philip. Yes, Philip and Elizabeth, not the Americans, but I just found that very strange that our two main characters are Philip and Elizabeth. But he's enlisting for the Navy, and he now wants to be called Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, and George is about to give a speech, but he actually stutters, and if you remember from the King's speech, that's something that George greatly struggled with, is his stuttering, and he ends up having to give it to someone else to read it. Says that he grants him the heirs male of his body, lawfully begotten the dignities of Baron Greenwich, Earl of Menteith, and the Duke of Edinburgh, and Knight Companion of their most noble order of the Garter. So he shakes his hand. This is basically agreeing that he will honor them, and that he will be, what they want him to be, and that he'll be a good lieutenant, and that he'll stay loyal. And Philip thanks him. Many of the men command him, and Elizabeth then goes to him and asks him how it went. He says they got through it, and he got through it, and he says he thinks they'd have preferred a nice pink-faced marquis with a grouse moor in the Scotland borders, and asks if she wouldn't prefer someone with a grander title rather than a homeless Charlie Crouch, because he feels that, he's too much for her, that maybe it's not really gonna work. But she says no, says that they would have all been very antiseptic, and she asks if he really has to smoke in there, which she hates. He says it's such a pity since he loves it, but like many other things, he's gonna give it all up for her. She says he still has 24 hours to change his mind, and he says he can't after all. It's simply too late. He signed himself away, and there's really nothing that she can do about it. He's going off, and she says he's won the greatest prize on earth, and he says that's certainly what they think. He kisses her. He says it's what he thinks too. He tells her to watch out, and then kisses her again, and he says a naval officer stag night chance would be a fine thing. He thanks her, and that is how the episode starts. Really good stuff overall, but I thought the overall was a very good introduction. We just perfectly get into these characters' lives. Definitely sets us up for what's to come. So we then see George. He's getting fitted for a suit for the wedding. He asks his two assistants about the blood in his spittle yesterday morning and asks if he should be concerned. They insist it's just a little. It shouldn't be anything to worry about, and that's just a result of the cold weather. That's what they think it is, at least. They're trying to make it seem like a big deal, but we can tell throughout this entire episode there's definitely more to it. I mean, no one just coughs up blood and then looks at it as nothing. That's just not how it works. And George says that's what he thought. He then tells Peter Townsend that the carriage will be cold too. Townsend says he's arranged for there to be hot water bottles, and George praises him for it. And as he is getting his tie fitted, he screams at James the tailor, says he's making it awfully hard to get out of this collar. Townsend goes to help him, says there's not going to let something as small as a collar bother him. Townsend then tells him about a young woman named Sally who enjoyed the occasional daily. She sat in the lap of a well-endowed chap and cried, "Sir, you're right up my alley." And then George laughs at it, says another rhyme or limerick, whatever you want to call it. I thought this was a good way of putting some humor in there. You know, we don't want these shows to be all dour and depressing because no one wants to watch that. No one wants to watch a show that's just depressing. So I like that there is some lighthearted humor in here because it just feels more real that way, and I think they did a good job with that. So he's then called to escort Elizabeth. He goes to her and insists that she'll be fine. Philip then looks at the crowd of people as the wedding starts, and they did a really good job of showing who is in favor of this wedding and then who very much oppose it, because there's very much a divide there. I mean, some people are there because they're forced to, and that, you know, this is something where they'll get fired if they don't, and then there are other people who really do support this wedding going on and feel this is exactly the right move for Philip and Elizabeth. But Philip looks at the crowd of people. Prime Minister Winston Churchill and his family are the last ones to arrive, which it's really cool to see Winston Churchill in the show. Churchill's happy about, which the crowd, while ridiculed, still feels for. Like, they feel that he thinks that he is in over his head. She meant talk about how they feel he's in over his head and that there's no way that he's going to win a second term, which we already know he's going to, but I like that already. There's that fear that maybe he won't win. And Churchill tells his wife Clementine this whole thing is Lord Louis Mountbatten's triumph. He is the one that engineered it, all the man who gave away India, and the crowd awaits for Elizabeth, who comes out in a carriage, and George goes to escort her. The wedding then proceeds. Shortly after, Elizabeth and Philip are married, though we can sense reluctance in what Elizabeth is saying. Even though she really likes, she really does love Philip, you can tell there's just a little bit of, I don't really know if I'm ready for what I'm getting myself into. Not that she doesn't want to be with Philip, I didn't see it that way. I saw it more as her saying, I don't really know if I'm up to the task. Do I really want to be this princess? Do I really want to be queen if God forbid something happens to my family? Am I really ready for that? And they then take their first picture together as husband and wife, and I thought that was just a really good way of getting us into this. I thought it was very quick that they were married, but I understood why, obviously. We have to get into the story overall. Queen Mary and the current Queen Elizabeth, which this is a little bit confusing, just to differentiate the two, I will refer to her as Queen Elizabeth. That is, of course, until Elizabeth becomes queen. I don't know when that's going to be, but right now, it's not as confusing because I'll say Queen Elizabeth, but of course, it's getting a little more confusing once Elizabeth becomes queen. We'll have to see when that happens, though. But anyways, they're discussing the wedding. Mary says they have to hand it to her. It's quite a victory. There wasn't a single person who supported this match in court or in government, we see. There really wasn't anyone who really thought this was a good idea. Yet here they all are, and the photographer asks for the groom's family. Mary says she turned them all on their heads and barely opened her mouth in the process. So Queen Elizabeth says she overestimates her, and Queen Mary says she underestimates her. And, Mary feels that she's much more capable than Elizabeth thinks she is. Elizabeth feels, oh, there's no way. She still looks at her as that little girl because that's her daughter and everything, but Queen Mary's saying, no, you should be fearful of her. She could very well be up to the task, and Queen Elizabeth says reality is sunk in with Philip's family, says to take Philip's mother as an example just out of a sanatorium and dressed as a nun, and you can tell they really are not a fan of Philip's family. I mean, these are people who are married to Nazis, these are people who are responsible for events in World War II, they just really are not fans of Philip's family, but they have to put all that aside because he's now married to, their daughter, and that is a huge deal. So they then go join in the picture. Elizabeth goes to George, who gives her a present, and she asks if she can open it. He says yes, and then to camera and says if her marriage is as great as his has been, he doesn't want to miss a single thing. And I think that this was just a really sweet moment between these two. You can really see he does love her, and Queen Elizabeth tells her to join them. She thanks him. Queen Elizabeth then goes to him as the crowd chants, they chant, "We want the king." She can tell he's not well. He goes out to give a speech, and just a really well done scene. It kind of reminded me of the King's Speech, so you did a good job of replicating that. I'll get more into that when we get into Jared Harris as an actor, but I thought you did a really good job with that. We then cut to 12 months later, which I was very surprised about, but right off the bat, we get this time jump to 12 months later, and we actually see real-life footage of Prince Charles being born, and shortly after Princess Anne is born, we see Philip and a bunch of other men competing in a rowing competition, which Elizabeth is taking a video of, just like everything else we saw. And I like the way that all this was documented, that they really did a good job of doing that. But Elizabeth tells everyone to get inside. A whole party is being thrown, and Elizabeth gives a speech telling him all that, as they know, soon Philip will no longer be just Lieutenant Mountbatten, but Lieutenant Commander Mountbatten, which she thinks involves a whole new gold ring for her to sew onto his uniform. He said it's half a gold ring. She says she's asked the two most important people there to do the presentation, which of course are Charles and Anne. kind of a cute scene the way it was done. Elizabeth's told that she has an important call from London waiting for her, and Queen Mary is with Queen Elizabeth, and George is in the hospital being operated on. It's clear his condition is a lot worse than they feared. Like, they're really worried for him. And Elizabeth and Mary tell her that they're operating, and it's been 2 hours, and shortly after the doctor comes out, lets them know that the procedure went well, and that George's immediate post-operative condition is only satisfactory, and luckily he's okay. For right now, at least, he's okay. I mean, we know that eventually what's going to happen to him, but for right now, he seems to be okay. Townsend then thanks him. Philip goes to see George, and we hear a radio announcer talk about how after the votes are counted, Churchill has once again been elected as Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and I thought that was just a really good way of doing that, the way the show subtly puts in things that we already know. I really did like that, and that's a very good example of the way the show does that. So they prepare breakfast for George, tell him to turn the radio off, and Gerald the butler goes to George, wakes him up. George asks who won. Gerald says it was Churchill by 17 seats, and George says good for him. You can tell that he's happy that Churchill won, which I like seeing. He says they keep trying to count him out, but he keeps getting back up, and Churchill gives a speech at what this nation needs is several years of strong, steady, experienced administration, and he then goes to his inauguration party, where he is met by literally tons of people who are congratulating him. He's told by his campaign manager, I mean, he definitely is a celebrity. I mean, really, he is definitely something big, and you definitely do see that. So his campaign manager tells him that while he just won a general election, it was still 155 over 90, and they can do much better. He knows they can, and Churchill tells him to have them look over paperwork about George's surgery, and tells him in the war they use mathematicians to decode the indecipherable, and he needs an expert to cut through the jargon, and asks if they're keeping something from him, because he can definitely tell that there's more going on. So his campaign manager says he wouldn't be unduly concerned about the man's phenomics, and given his age and that he's a smoker, catarrhal inflammation is not that unusual. But he would be concerned about the bronchoscopy, which they wouldn't have done unless they were looking at something much more serious. And they conspicuously forget to mention the results. Instead, they go on about the lung resection, and Churchill says they performed it because of structural alterations, and he asks what they are, and his campaign manager says it's a word they try to use that it almost inevitably describes. Definitely, I thought that was interesting, but it definitely hints that there's definitely something much more serious going on with King George. And of course, we know what it is, but they just did a very good job as if you didn't know what actually happened to King George and you don't know the results of what happened to him. This was a really good way of really setting us up for what actually is going on with them. So he hands him the paperwork, asks who is this man, and George then tells Gerald to just put a little makeup on so he doesn't overdo, but doesn't want to look ill either. And I forgot to say, most of this episode actually does focus on Churchill and George. While Elizabeth is our main character, she's kind of a supporting player in this one. This episode is showing Churchill and George's relationship, showing the way that these two go about their life, and I thought overall they did that really, really well. Because you know eventually Elizabeth is going to come into the forefront, but for this episode it focused on these two characters, and they really were the two characters we followed in this episode. But basically, he says, a sick king is no good to anyone. There must be no weakness, no vulnerability, and he feels that he can't look sick. So the only way he can do that is to put on makeup, and he goes into Buckingham Palace where he's met by huge crowds. He's then proceeded with an armchair that Gerald thought he would be well suited for Churchill, who then goes in to greet George, and we get this really great interaction between these two. You know, Churchill the whole time knows something more is going on. George at the same time isn't really as fond of Church as he seems, so I really did love the way this scene was done. You can really tell these are two very different men with very similar agendas, but have very different beliefs, and you definitely do see that here. So Churchill goes in to greet George. George lets him know his party has won the election, and as a sovereign, he invites him to form a government in his name. Churchill accepts, and George congratulates him and asks if it would be unconstitutional of him to say how happy he is. He's missed their weekly chats and says his predecessor is a fine parliamentarian, a good man, but he lets him know in an empty taxi pulled up and at the House of Commons, and Clement Richard Attlee got out, and who of course is the opposing party for Churchill, and George tells him he may now congratulate him in return. Churchill asks what for, and he says for his rapid recovery, and it's a really well done scene because Churchill knows that George George is not okay. He knows for a fact that George is not okay, but he can tell that George sees how good he is. So the way that Churchill makes it seem like he's under the guise of, making it seem like he's okay, I thought was really well done here. He says he seemed to have bounced back a lot quicker than people expected him to. Churchill agrees, and George says he's not sure he ever imagined what breathing through one lung would feel like. Turns out there's barely any difference, and Churchill says that's good. George says it's probably wise to let Elizabeth undertake the Commonwealth tour. Churchill asks if she's really up to the task, which we can tell that Elizabeth doesn't really feel like she is, but George says he'd say so. Besides, they have to start breaking her in gently and keeping their eyes on the distant future. You can see that deep down, George knows that eventually he's going to have to appoint Elizabeth as more than just a princess. You definitely see that. But Churchill, after being met by press, goes to meet all the ladies and meets a new addition named Vanita Scott. He then goes to Clementine. I'm not going to lie, I didn't really understand what was going on in that scene. Who are these ladies? Why are they there? I don't really know. I'm not gonna lie, that scene in general, there's a lot of things I don't know about how political systems work in Britain, and this show did pretty well in the first episode. There's a few things I'm a little bit concerned about, so, I'm not concerned, but a little bit confused about, so, if you guys are more educated than that, I'm sorry, I'm not. Again, I'm American. I don't know much about going on in places other than America. So, if you guys do, please let me know, because I really did not understand what was going on with that Vanita Scott woman. I really did not understand that at all. But she asked him how the king was. He says he talked about a great deal about his recovery. Lots of mention of bouncing back, which always makes one fear the worst. Not to mention the makeup. He could tell that he was wearing rouge, and she says the poor man, he says actually lung cancer, and he knows deep down that George is sick, and she asks who knows. He says no one, especially George himself, and he has called him for lunch, says they should have it in there. They eat. Clementine asks if he's dying. Churchill says they all are. That's what defies the condition of living. He will die tomorrow, but but possibly says, he's not going to die tomorrow, obviously, but possibly soon. Says after the country needs to lead by someone strong, which he is, and you can tell that Churchill feels that if something bad happens to George, that he's going to be appointed to maybe take his place. You definitely see that, and he says he's also tired. They're both on a situation like that would require enormous energy, and I like how Churchill is just as naive as George. He himself is also very tired, and he says he has considered resigning for Anthony's sake, for her sake, but then he realizes a situation like that would also require statesmanship. The party needs him, and the country needs him, so she needs him, meaning Elizabeth. Elizabeth needs him. So I really did like that overall. I like how Churchill, you can tell something's going on with George, but at the same time, he's doing what he can to cover it up, and I really did like that overall. So Philip and Elizabeth are then getting their new house done. Elizabeth kisses him goodbye to have breakfast with her mother and Margaret. He tells her he's checking curtain fabrics in an hour. Townsend is then told the Queen wants to see him, and we get a little bit with Margaret. We only get one scene with her in this episode, but it definitely hints at where Margaret is going to go this season. They did a good job with that. But Elizabeth tells Queen Elizabeth and Margaret that she and Philip do love living at Clarence House. He has all sorts of ideas about how to modernize it. He's really rather ingenious like that, and Townsend goes to them. We see... And Queen Elizabeth says she has to make a decision about Christmas and asks if he thinks the king will be well enough to go to Sandringham. And Townsend says he does. As a matter of fact, they're doing good. She says it's decided then, and Margaret asks if he will be joining them. Queen Elizabeth says of course not, he will be spending Christmas at home with his family, and Margaret says she was only thinking of George. Given the chance, she'd never let him out of her sight, because, he always looks after George and everything, so Queen Elizabeth says that's true, he's quite devoted to him, and Townsend says he'll discuss it with Rosemary. Queen Elizabeth says it's out of the question. Margaret asks why, says to let him discuss it since he did offer. Queen Elizabeth says that may be true, but as a wife, she knows what her answer would be. She'd want her husband at home at Christmas with his children, and says to excuse her, and Elizabeth can obviously tell there's something going on with Margaret. I mean, she wouldn't just casually ask Peter to join them. There's definitely more going on. So she tells Margaret she saw that. Margaret asks what she means. Elizabeth says the look between the two of them. Margaret clearly likes him and says she must tell no one. Papers all think she's for Johnny Dalkeith or Billy Wallace, and she says Elizabeth and George think that too. Margaret says they're just boys, whereas Townsend is a man, and Elizabeth says she gets it, but he's married regardless, and there's not much that she can really do about that. She understands why Margaret would like him, but at the same time, he's married, so you definitely get the sense that something's going to go on there, which I'm interested in seeing. A little bit worried the way that's going to go, but we'll have to see. Townsend then comes in to tell George that Dr. Weir has arrived. Weir sits down. George says that he has told him about the operation, that he may have had some soreness and some difficulty breathing, and this scene was so well done. I love the way this was done because, again, the whole episode, you can tell that some more has been going on with George, and finally he actually becomes aware of it, and he gets some difficulty breathing, but he didn't tell him about this. He shows him a tissue filled with blood, and Weir asks how often it is. George says all the time, and says at the time of the operation, structural alterations were discovered, the blockage of the lung, and Weir says it's time to give the blockage a name, and that name is, of course, lung cancer. He does, in fact, have it, and asks him if they removed it, and I love the second that George realized it, he's like, okay, did you remove it? Is there a way to get rid of it? Like, he cannot believe that he actually has lung cancer, you know, he doesn't think it's possible, and Weir says they removed the left lung, but the right has fewer, but still significant blockages, and George asks him what's next. Weir says he argued that he should be told at the time a patient has arrived to know the full story, but he was overruled and thought that he could throw himself into his work without undue stress and worry. So George gets up, tells him he has 2 questions, asks him who knows the full picture, and Weir says apart from the surgeons, probably only Churchill, and says to make sure he does not tell the rest of his family, he just can't let them know right now. And you wonder when he actually is going to tell them, because, I mean, it's only going to be a matter of time before it gets worse. And George asks how long he has. Weir says it's impossible to say. His understanding is the surgeons did everything they could, and it could be years, more likely months, and basically makes us realize that George is going to die very, very soon. We don't know why, but we don't know when, but that definitely is going to happen, and knowing that knowledge really does add to a lot of the emotion we feel for George overall in the show. I think they did that really well. So his family then take the train to Sandagram, and by far, probably the most touching and hardest scene to watch in this episode. I honestly, not on the verge of tears, I would say, but I definitely did feel for George in this scene. I really thought this was well done. Along with the rest of his family, they arrive to a screaming crowd. They go to a homeless shelter where many children come to sing to them, and eventually George goes to sing with them, knowing that this may very well be his last Christmas. You know, seeing that scene, you have all these homeless people, and George just goes to them because he doesn't want to waste a minute of this, but the fact that he knows this is going to be his last Christmas and the rest of the family, it's completely of no to them, really does add, like I said, to the emotion of the scene. The weight is really, the emotional weight is really there, and I think he did a really good job with that. So Charles and Anne are then learning to ride a bike. Elizabeth is told that George wants to see her. She goes, he tells her right off the bat he doesn't really have anything of significance to say to her, and this was probably my favorite scene in the episode. I really did love this. He just wanted to spend time with her, and he says if there's anything she'd like to ask him, just go ahead, and you get the sense that he knows he's not going to have much time left with his daughter, so he's doing what he can to savor the time, and he's going to try to have as much time with her as possible, especially the fact he knows that pretty soon she is going to become queen. That's going to happen very soon. He doesn't know when, but it's going to happen, and knowing that he probably won't have as much time with her once she does become queen, he wants to savor the moment as much as he can. You definitely see that here. So she asks if the boxes are a nuisance. He says not. If she keeps on top of them, even at Christmas. She asks what's inside. He says everything they want to know, they stick on top. Everything they would rather not want it to know, they stick on the bottom. Cabinet meetings, foreign office briefings, which is why the first thing he does when no one else is looking is slam the box on the table and see what's inside. So he starts to heavily cough. She can see that he's not well, and she doesn't know what's going on. She just knows that he's obviously not well. So she grabs on the flyers, and she asks if he gets sick of it all and lonely. He says he does. He says that is why it's so important to have the right person by her side at all times. He's been very lucky in that regard with her mother, and he asks about Philip, and she says he's become something of a snagaholic since they're renovating Clarence's house to make it their permanent home, and ever since he started supervising the work, he can't look at anything without seeing its faults, and he says he should make more of an effort with him. She says to take him shooting, which she thinks he would love, and that's when his health's improved. They'll return to Malta, and he'll have his navy again, and all will be well. That's what she feels, at least. You know, she thinks everything's going to be fine, but we know, obviously, that's not going to happen. And he said in the meantime, he's still not sure if he's well enough to travel long distances anyway, which brings him to the forthcoming Commonwealth tour, and says that he was wondering if she'd like to step into his shoes. His health is improving, but he's still not well enough. She says if he thinks she's up to it, and he says that she'll be fine. She asks where it is, and he explains to her where she'll be. So she tells Philip all about it. They start in Ceylon, Australia, then on to New Zealand and Bermuda. There's talk of starring in Kenya. Philip says it will be long months, and she says it will be, but it would mean so much to George that they do it, and he asks what he's supposed to do all that time. You can tell he's very reluctant to do it. You know, he talks about how are the children going to be okay without their parents. She says they're not really going to know since they're too young, but it would help in George's recovery, so Philip does agree to it, and that definitely gives it the sense already. There's a lot of things that George isn't able to do on his own. It already shows that there's a lot of stuff that Elizabeth is going to have to do, even though she's not queen. She's preparing for it, and I think they're doing a really good job of her setting up her becoming queen and playing a much more dominant role in this than she probably anticipated she would. So George then getting into bed, coughing. Gerald asks him if he's okay. He ignores the question, and instead he goes on to talk about the weather. He's doing everything he can to dodge this question because he just doesn't want anyone to know that he has lung cancer, and I'll get more into that, but the next morning, Gerald greets him, decides to make him Walferton Splash, aka Duck, why this episode is called Walferton Splash. So George then goes to take Philip shooting. George assures everyone that they'll be fine since Philip's in the Navy. He's obviously very highly trained, so they have nothing to worry about. They sit on separate kayaks, and George asks if he understands the titles, the dukedom. They're not the job. She is the job. She is the essence of his duty, loving her, protecting her. Of course, he'll miss his career, but doing this for her, and for him, there may be no greater act of patriotism or love, and Philip says he understands, and I really like this scene, because that is true. I mean, everything they do, all the political stuff, that definitely matters, but what matters the most is him, loving her and protecting her, and just him always, just agreeing with her and things like that. That's what their relationship really is. And Philip says he thinks so, says they'll go shoot some ducks. So Elizabeth goes into George's study. She closed the doors. She sees the fake crown on his desk while George, Philip, and the rest of the men partake in shooting, while George the whole time is heavily coughing. And Elizabeth looks at the crown, and you see the look on her face. She's realizing what's asked of her, what task she'll need to perform, and that she very well may be in George and Elizabeth's position very soon, and that is the way the episode ends. Really good stuff overall, but let's just get into this episode and where I really think the show is going to go after this first episode. So overall, guys, I think this was definitely a really good start. I really do love where the show is headed, but let's get more into the show, starting off with the acting, because I definitely do have a lot to say about the performances in this show. So this is a show where I think more than ever, one of the most important things is the casting. I mean, these are huge, huge roles. This is a royal family that everyone knows. I mean, even though like I said, I don't really know shit when it comes to the history of Queen Elizabeth and her family and everything. Everyone knows the name Queen Elizabeth. Everyone knows the name King George the Sixth. Everyone knows those names. Those are very important names, and I'm glad that they casted them so well. I think everyone really in the show is perfectly casted, and the acting in the show really is fantastic. But let's talk about our titular lead here. Claire Foy as Queen Elizabeth, right now Princess Elizabeth, is, I think, perfectly casted. She did an incredible job in this first episode. What I really love about her character is that she doesn't at all feel like she's royalty. She's very, very normal, and that's perfectly fine for her character. This is supposed to be an origin story of sorts, and you definitely do get the sense of that. This is someone who, while I think she is knowing what she has to do, she doesn't really know if she's really willing to perform to the task. She obviously has to by getting married and everything she had to, but she doesn't really know what she's in for, and the way that she already is being told to do things and having to do all these things that she just didn't realize, what she really signed up for, I think is really great with her character. I really did love what Claire Foy is doing in this role, and you really do get the sense that this is Queen Elizabeth at a young age. I really love what they're doing there. Can't wait to see where she is going, because she really was great in this first episode and really does command the show. Even though she wasn't the lead in this first episode, like I said, this episode was more George and Winston Churchill. They really were the two main leads here. Even though she wasn't, she still shined in pretty much every scene she was in. She did a really great job, and I can't wait to see where the show is going to go once we focus on her a little bit more than we did in this first episode. Now, Matt Smith is someone that I was definitely very interested in, because if you guys know, I'm not the hugest fan of his Doctor Who portrayal. I think it's fine for what he did. I think he did a good job, definitely, as the Doctor, but I do think that it was a little silly and a little, cartoony, and I know I used to say, oh, Matt Smith was great, but compared to what Peter Capaldi has done, there's no way I think Matt Smith is nearly as good. I think Peter Capaldi was really good, but that's more of a Doctor Who thing. But either way, I'm very happy to see that he's playing this character of Prince Philip, where he can be taken more seriously. Not that Matt Smith didn't have serious work as the Doctor, but he definitely has a lot more serious stuff to do, and I really do like Philip's character overall. This is someone who clearly does love Elizabeth, but you're not really sure if he loves all this royalty stuff that's going going on. The only reason that I think he continues to stay is because he really does love Elizabeth, and that's something that these two really do have. They have very good chemistry, and I really like that. It seems like a very clean relationship. This isn't a dirty relationship full of lies and things like that. Do I think it's eventually going to come to that? Oh yeah, I mean, again, I don't know much about their relationship, but I think it definitely is going to happen. We'll have to see where this is going to go, but I really do love these two characters. I think their chemistry is definitely very well done, and again, not many scenes of them this episode, but the scenes we got were really well done. You know the second episode is going to focus on them more, so I can't wait to see really where they're going to go, because they really were great. And then Vanessa Kirby in the show as Margaret had only one scene, but I'm very interested in seeing where she's going to go. I know the whole thing with her liking Townsend was a genuine thing, so I don't really know where exactly her whole story is going to go, because clearly Townsend, I mean, he's married. He seems happily married. Doesn't really seem like there's anything wrong with his marriage, so I don't know if she's going to try to pursue him and it's going to be unrequited love. I'm hoping it's not an affair. I don't want the show to do that. I don't think it will, because the show is obviously very realistic and this stuff did in fact happen. But the character of Princess Margaret, I really do like. I like where they're headed with her, and I'm looking forward to seeing really where she's going to go. You know, maybe focus on the jealousy of her and Elizabeth, her wishing that she maybe was in her position, just some really good stuff they can do with her. There's so much stuff they can do with this character that I'm hoping they do, and I really do hope that they end up rising to the occasion of, you know, really doing what they can with this character, because there's so much potential with her. Now, the actors in the show, while they are good, they don't really have a ton to do, or they're not even introduced yet. Like, someone like an Anthony Eden, or, say, even Townsend didn't have, like, a ton to do in this first episode. They were good for what they had. Lord Louis Mountbatten, I don't even think was introduced here. They didn't really have a ton to do in this episode, but I'm sure they will have more to do as it goes on. I really did like Eileen Atkins as Queen Mary and Victoria Hamilton as Queen Elizabeth. You know, this is someone who they are mother and daughter, but they have very different opinions. You know, Queen Elizabeth, she feels Elizabeth is ready to be queen, while Queen Mary feels that she's just too young, and I think that's going to be a big part of the show. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing where that's going to go. But out of all the actors, there are two very distinct performances that really stick out in this first episode. And it's probably because they focus most of the episode on them, but out of everyone, these two really are so great here. And really, I think if there's anything the show should get Emmys for, it should be these two performances. First off, being Jared Harris as King George VI. Now, this is a very hard role to pull off, because it has been done many times before, but I was definitely really looking forward to seeing what he was going to do here, and he absolutely blew me away. They did such a great job at focusing on this character, showing everything that's going on with him, and just getting us to really feel for this guy. This is not just someone who, you know, he is a king, and obviously he knows he's going to die and things like that, but it's more that he feels that he is this, you know, he is this king of very royal high stature, and everyone feels that he is perfect. So if he has any flaws, he feels that he can be taken seriously and that he should be ridiculed for that. He hates himself for it, and you really do see that here. You see that he does everything in his power to hide the fact that he has this sickness, because God forbid he show any sort of vulnerability or weakness. And there's so much great emotional stuff with him. You really do care for him. He really did show that vulnerability so well in that performance, and the way that he wants to, you know, save the time with his family and, you know, make time for his daughter and do all that stuff, I really did love. And you really could see, if you've seen the King's Speech, you really could see this being an older Colin Firth. The way they did that was really well done, and I really liked it. I know it's obviously not a sequel to the King's Speech, but it kind of felt like it is. Just the way the show did that, I thought was really cool. King George VI, I'm hoping that he doesn't go too early, because he is just such a presence in this show. He's so great here. He's one of the best things about this entire show, and losing him would be a real loss, so I'm hoping that, well, he is listed as main character, so hoping he stays around for a long time. I really love what he has to do here. I can't wait to see what else he has to do, but luckily there is one performance that's equally just as great that, if he does go, really does make up for that. And that performance being none other than John Lithgow as Winston Churchill, who once again really did blow me away. This is a huge, huge role to play. I mean, everyone knows the name Winston Churchill. Everyone really knows who he was. But what I really liked about Winston Churchill is, again, the way they're humanizing him. You know, this isn't just someone who is prime minister and he's full of himself. That's not really who he is. he, again, knows that he is kind of in over his head, because he really is kind of in over his head. He feels that he's powerful. I think he kind of feels like he's more of a friend to George than he is, and he even feels like he may take over for George, and I think their feud is going to be a big part of the show. Definitely, you definitely do see that. I really love what John Lithgow had to do here. He had a few scenes, but when he shined, damn that he really shined. He was incredible in this first episode. I thought he really did a great job, and I can't wait to see overall what he's going to do. This cast in general really is so promising, and like I said, I think everyone was so perfectly casted, and that's something that all Netflix shows do really well. But for a big show like this, I'm very happy to see everyone that was casted. I can't wait to see where we're going to go from here, and the acting by far is one of the best things about the show. Specifically Jared Harris and John Lithgow, but I think the rest are just as good, and really the cast in general really does, it really does add to how great the show really is. So the acting's really good, but I really do want to talk about the writing and the directing, because Peter Morgan, even though the show does have really good acting, Peter Morgan is so heavily influenced with the show. I mean, he writes every episode, he directs the first 2 episodes, and it really does show. Well, not directs, actually, he's not the one that directs. It's actually, that's a lie. He's not the one that directs. Stephen Daldry's the one that directs, but it really does show in this first episode. The lavish style, the the big focus on characters is something the show does really well. So the show that could be very style over substance, and they really don't do that. What they choose to do is they focus on the characters, they focus on the smaller things, and it's not a completely depressing show either. There definitely is hope. It shows that this family really did love each other. It shows this is a family that was a real family, and that these are actual human beings. They're not these perfect people that we associate they will be. I mean, again, even though we are American, we can't help but want to know more about this royal family, and they did a really good job at showing that a royal family is just that. They are a royal family that just happens to be royal, but they are still a family, and they showed that very, very well here. Now, my only issue with this first episode, and I'm hoping that this isn't a problem with the rest of the series, is that the editing is very choppy in this show, and it definitely does make up for the writing. The writing is great. I think there's so many amazing scenes, even in this first episode, I thought that were just so well done. The way the show is getting into not just Elizabeth's head, but everyone's head, you really do see, showing what it really means to be royal, but also what it means to be of high stature and of high class. I mean, everyone looks up to them. Everyone sees them as these huge celebrities, but there are those very few there are those very few uncommon folk that don't really see them that way. They see them as stuck up. They see them as rich. They see them as jealous, and they portrayed those two sides very, very well just in this first episode. And I think that's something that's going to be shown very well throughout the show, but it also shows, is Philip ready to rise to the occasion? Is Elizabeth ready to rise to the occasion? Those are things that I think we're really going to answer in this first season. Well, not just the season, but in the show in general. And also, is their relationship really going to be tested? I think it definitely is. Already in that first scene between Elizabeth and Philip, you can tell that there is a bit of hesitation with Philip wanting to just adhere to everything that, George tells him to do. Even though he respects George, he doesn't really have the bond that Elizabeth does have with him. So I'm hoping that, luckily, they'll be able to, hopefully they'll be able to have that bond through that whole shooting thing they did. So that's definitely going to be interesting. But the cinematography in the show is amazing. I mean, Netflix put their entire budget into the show. This is the most expensive show that Netflix has ever done. It is insane how much was poured in this. I think it was probably the amount of Game of Thrones that was poured in this. I mean, it really was very expensive, and it definitely did make up for it. I mean, this looks like the 40s. They do everything they can to make it look like the 40s, and they did that really, really well. Just the shots of Buckingham Palace, or the shots of, the wedding or something like that. Just all the shots in the show are so beautifully crafted. It is one of the best looking shows Netflix has ever done. It might be the best looking show Netflix has ever done. I love everything about the cinematography. It's just amazing to look at, and I can't wait to see I can't wait to see more, because it really is just so well shot. The score in the show as well is great. The score, I don't know if you guys know this, is actually from Hans Zimmer. I don't know how the hell they got him, but it really does show here. The score is so great. I love the intro of the show. There's something so epic about it that I really do love, and I think they did a really good job with that. And let me just say, there definitely are going to be obvious, so I really did like what they did with that. Now, let me just say, there are going to be obvious comparisons to Downton Abbey in this first episode. Now, I'm not someone that really watched Downton Abbey, and I'll tell you guys why. When I wanted to watch it was the point when I heard that the show wasn't nearly as good. I heard after a character is killed off, I'm not going to spoil who, but after a certain character is killed off, the show gets not as good, and it gets really shitty and kind of unnecessarily long. Not shitty, just very underwhelming and just not as good as it was. So the fact that they did that, I never watched Downton Abbey, and this really does make up for that. You definitely do see a British family here. This is a very British show, but what I like about the show is that it's not hard to understand. This isn't one of those British shows that like, oh, it's full of British humor and I don't understand it. They did a really good job with that. I will admit there are some things I don't fully understand, but that's just because I'm not as into the culture of like, how British people live, but I'm sure the show will get me into that. How does this royal family live? How do they go about their lives? There's things the show did very, very well, and I can't wait to see the way that that's going to be. The editing to the show, like I said, is a bit choppy, though. I think the time jump, I understood why it was necessary, but I'm hoping that there isn't that throughout this entire first season, because I know that they have a lot to cover. There's apparently going to be 6 seasons, and it's going to be from now till the present. I don't know how the hell they're going to do that in 6 seasons, but I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of skips in time. So I'm hoping the show does do a little bit better with editing. It wasn't a huge issue, but it definitely was a bit choppy here. So I'm interested in seeing, really, I'm hoping that the show fixed that up, because definitely that did kind of ruin a bit of the show for me. But overall, guys, I really did love the first episode. I really am looking forward to seeing where the show is going to go. Let me know what you guys thought of this first episode. Left your thoughts on it. There's definitely so much potential the show has. There's so many places the show can go, and I think this really is going to be another big hit for Netflix. They already have commissioned a second season, so we know that's definitely going to happen. We know it's supposed to be 6 seasons. Hopefully the show gets to have the 6 seasons, because there's so many shows where they're like, oh, it's supposed to go this long, it didn't. I'm hoping that The Crown is not one of those shows. I'm hoping that they do get to live it out as long as they want to. But either way, guys, let me know what you guys thought of this first episode. Left your thoughts on it. If you are someone that knows stuff about Queen Elizabeth and the royal family, just let me know if the show accurately portrayed it, because I'm honestly interested in seeing how the show portrayed all that stuff and what they end up doing with that. But that's in my review. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you guys in my next video, which will be for Girl Meets World, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.